40% of business leaders rank cyber risk as their top risk.
Hackers are logging in, they're not hacking in.
This week we're talking cyber risk, and I'm joined by Adrian Munday, Group Head of Operational Technology and Cyber Risk at Standard Chartered, and Christian Arndt, Head of Cyber Strategy at PwC UK. A question for both of you actually about just the field in general. What interests you about it and how did you get into it? Christian, maybe you could start.
I started off being a pen tester, ethical hacker as it were, in that team, and just kind of grew out of there. And why am I interested in the topic and why have I stayed? It's always evolving. It's always changing. It's really fascinating in topic. You know, it was very, very niche, very technical. But over the years, it's like a boardroom topic now, right? Everybody talks about it. It's in the news. It's a fantastic topic. And any day is different as well. That's why I'm in cybersecurity.
Adrian, what about you?
So I started my career leading technology and operational transformation in banks. And I've now spent the last 10 years leading operational technology and cyber risk functions at a couple of different institutions. So my perspective is a little bit different. I come at it from the angle of the resilience of the organization. And what fascinates me is there are very few topics that really speak to the ongoing viability of the business model of an organization. And I think the work in and around cyber resilience, it really is at the heart of most organizations. And that's why I continue to find it fascinating. I also get to work with an incredible team. So our first line CISOs are an amazing bunch. And the second line team that I have specializing in cyber working for me as well. Very talented group. Big plug. You can delete that out.
Yeah. I think sometimes you can be really lucky to find yourself in a space where you're really passionate and curious about the topic, and every day you get up and you're like, wow, this happened in the news. I must tell someone about that. And that's the job I work in, and that's why I love it.
Yeah, I think cyber, if I think about my role parochially, a lot of what I do is it's like the cardiovascular system of an organization. It's the blood that pumps around. Cyber is really the nervous system. And so it's really fascinating to see those two things interplay.
Just to help us set the scene a little bit, Adrian, I wonder if you can just tell us, from your perspective, what is cyber risk?
Big question. I'll maybe start off with a slightly formal definition, which is how we define it here, which is the risk of loss of data, loss of funds, or loss of service due to the activities of an external threat actor, an internal actor, or a third-party vulnerability. Ransomware is something that's high profile in the press, where a threat actor gains access to your organization's technology in some way, shape, or form, and then seeks to extort funds from the organization by holding part of your organization to ransom. Typically, it's encrypting data, for example.
It's a really critical issue. So, Christian, I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about your experience in this space and why it is such a critical issue.
It's quite interesting in that the last 20 years or so, it's something that a board will now regularly talk about. There's been so many things in the media over the last even 6 months or the last year that have made it super, super topical. And what that's meant is that people have become very, very interested in the topic, not only from have I got the right controls in place? Am I doing the right things? How worried I should be about this topic? It's kind of driven investment in cyber risk over time.
And just to add to that, I think I saw a stat recently that now versus 10, 20 years ago, 40% of business leaders rank cyber risk as their top risk across their enterprise. So exactly to Christian's point, it's very much top of mind at board. And then if you think about financial services specifically, security trust is clearly central to our mission, where people put their livelihoods, their money for safety with us. So unsurprisingly, cyber risk, cybersecurity is a big topic for banks.
It's actually what people are actually really worried about from a topic point of view. Because you talk about cyber risk, it's a bit ethereal, right? What does it actually really mean? And underneath, over time, it's kind of changed a little bit. We always used to be very worried about someone breaking in and whether stealing funds or money. That evolved over time into be, oh, someone might steal our data. And then we had regulations and GDPR and stuff like that. Now it's evolved into this whole resilience conversation where people are worried about their organization existing or being able to trade or being available for customers to use, whether it's selling stuff or their online portals being available. And that's kind of the evolution of the topic, where it was very technical. Someone might get in here and do something very niche, and they were super hackers with hoodies, to like, oh, we're going to steal our data. Well, okay, they're going to lose data. What does that really mean? Or we might be fined. What's our real impact? Now to a topic where people see in the media, wow, if that happens to us, we won't be able to sell product tomorrow. And that just changed that narrative massively for the board, for the exec, for shareholders, and everybody through the organization.
I mean, thinking about that evolution, obviously, you've both used that word. What's happened in that 20 years that's made it so important?
I think one of the big features, and then I'll let Christian chip in, is the explosion, I think it's fair to say, of attacks taking place. And I think over the last 4 years, there was some World Economic Forum data out which the average organisation suffers weekly 800 attacks a week. And that was 4 years ago. Now it's closer to 2,000. So I think one part of why this is now so high profile, and if you think about 2025, there's been what feels like a very significant increase in the number of attacks being reported in the press. So I think that for me is probably the number one feature. It's just the volume of attacks that are going on and the activity of threat actors.
I think this is quite, over the last 20 years, it's quite a long time of technical evolution, shall we say, right? And the digitization of business is probably what's driven that. And we talk a lot about, inside we talk about an attack surface and the idea that a company isn't as simple as it used to be. It's not this kind of castle-like structure with one internet portal. Maybe you saw some brochureware. Now everything's online. Every service is delivered digitally. And it's not in your own data center anymore. It's in cloud data centers. It's in SaaS platforms and other ways of delivering technology to people. It's very, very complicated, the ecosystem you're trying to protect. So not only have you got increasing threats and more threat actors, you've also got an ecosystem of a business that's very complicated and it's also very digital. So there's a lot more places that people can poke holes in it. At the same time, threats have gone up for a couple of reasons. One of them is obviously IT skills have increased. The internet has enabled the training of people in many things, including hacking skills. We talk a lot about the commoditization of tools and techniques, and that is the idea of that, maybe a long time ago, I was the single guru hacker, the people you kind of see in movies that could do everything end to end. It's just not how it works in the common world. These people still exist, but in the common world now is, I might specialize in writing a tool that does X. You might pick that tool up and then use it to break into somewhere or get some credentials. You might then sell that to someone else, and someone else specializes the next bit of that chain. So you have like an ecosystem of threat actors working together, training each other, sharing information, sharing logins that they've stolen. That's the evolution. So threats have evolved, threat actors have evolved, they've got more skills, they've evolved, they've digitized. So the whole ecosystem is just more efficient in a way.
And I think Christian mentioned it a couple of times there. I think we probably used to see this as a discipline with a fortress with high walls. Yeah. And the ecosystem, the evolution of the business model, the digital business model, I think has been critical in hybrid environments, working on-premise and with cloud providers, for example. That has emerged over the last few years. And so rather than having this single perimeter of the organization, now we've got multiple fronts that we need to fight on.
And can you share some examples, Christian? Because I know you've had a lot of experience as a CISO or Chief Information Security Officer in your past. When you talk about these threats and some of these attacks and the evolution of them, what do they look like now? What's an example?
So that Adrian already mentioned ransomware as an example. So that is probably the most prevalent thing that's happening at the moment. And actually, if you just take that and you take it as a topic, you think, okay, that's one form of attack. But how that occurs and happens has really changed recently. We started to coin the idea and the term about, hackers are logging in, they're not hacking in. So what's really changed over the last, say, 3 or 4 years is and it's a positive story, have gotten quite better at protecting the endpoints of laptops and servers. Now attackers have realized that, so they've kind of went, oh, that's good, I'll go somewhere else. So what they've been doing is they've been either looking for stolen credentials where people have been phished or the people have reused their credentials, something, and they've been using those credentials to log directly into cloud services. So instead of going through the corporate network, which we've got a little bit better at over the years, they're now going just directly to the cloud services, bypassing that. And there are different ways. Those credentials might be available on the dark web, or they might just be phoning up a help desk and asking for a password to be reset. Or and if someone's deployed two-factor authentication, they've worked out ways of maybe spamming the user so that just gets reset, or asking for that to be reset to a different phone number. So they've actually just moved places where they get in initially. And then the long-term goal with ransomware is, I want to steal the data, or I'll say I won't release it if you pay me some money, or I'll just encrypt everything on your network so you can't use it. So the end game is the same, but the entry point has moved, and that's always changing. So in the most recent attacks we saw, that was all through help desks and people starting a help desk because they realized those processes weren't as good as they should have been. So it's like an evolution of attack.
I think an interesting aside, I saw, this is a fairly well-known research, but the level of damage inflicted by cyber attacks every year in the global economy is into the several $1 trillion. There's some debate around the number, but it ranks only behind the US and China in terms of the size of the economy involved. So it is an amazing scale.
And Adrian, how do you defend against that?
Well, look, maybe there's sort of two answers. What assets have you got exposed to the internet, for example? Protect, so patching, access management that Christian was referring to a second ago. Monitor, so make sure that you are actively spotting where a threat actor may have gained access to your environment. Respond, so make sure you've got the appropriate incident management, and then recover.
Patching is ridiculously difficult when you've got large legacy estates. Trying to keep them up to date is really, really hard to do. And we're always playing catch up. That's just, you have to keep focusing on it. If you lose focus, you get behind. Identity is massively important. I talked about why, because of the ransomware threat, but there's also a topic that we've always struggled with as an industry because it is complex. You've got lots of users with access to lots of different things, and it's just expanding at a rapid rate. You just have to focus on it. And then the last, well, there's many hard basics, but the last thing I want to kind of just mention is I had the most important piece of advice when I became CISO, which was focus on what will happen when you have an incident. You know, there's a classic comment about it's not if, it's when something will happen. And the advice I gave him was go and find out who your incident response is and put their number in your phone, which is exactly what I did. And it's to be able to make sure that you've planned, you've tested, you've thought about, you know who to phone, you know what you're going to do in a crisis. Prepare for it. If you don't prepare, then you're running around like a headless chicken and you're just wasting so much time at the beginning of a crisis, and it's super, super important. Once you've kind of focused on the hard basics and you know what you're doing around incidents and you've planned and stuff, you can really think longer term about what's my strategy? What am I going to really do? What areas am I going to target? And where that's changed over the last couple of years, I've really started to talk to people about the idea of the securable enterprise. Now, the idea is that I talked a little bit about attack surface and how that's changing. If you're trying to secure something that's not securable, right? You've got hundreds of users, you've got hundreds of websites, you've got 20 different versions of server software, you've got 20 different versions of cloud providers. It becomes very, very difficult to secure. So one way of thinking about security, which is completely countercultural, is don't throw a new tool at it. Actually think about IT and how you can evolve your IT, your business model.
And so that is some of the things Christian mentioned there, moving on to standardized platforms to enable us to manage the security standards within our architecture rather than tackling each individual problem, and then making sure that we've exercised crisis management processes so that in the case of an incident, we're able to respond as quickly as possible with the right people immediately. And then the third is building the infrastructure to enable us to recover when or if we do suffer an incident. So, as I mentioned earlier, immutable backups, storage, where we can access a clean version of the data and restore our services as quickly as possible.
AI is obviously the hot topic of the moment, and this conversation wouldn't be complete without it. But How is that changing the point of entry? Are we going to start seeing AI becoming more of a threat in this space than people? Like, what is the landscape looking like in that respect?
So AI is a double-edged sword when it comes to cybersecurity. On one side, you're definitely seeing attackers utilizing it in a number of different ways. But we're also seeing, from a defender's point of view, all of the security tooling is getting AI enabled. And what we kind of see is a gap is going to develop whereby attackers can utilize AI a lot faster and a lot easier in their processes. They don't have anything that needs to be signed off or budgets. They can just utilize stuff, and who cares about what the risks are and data leakage and all the challenges that we have adopting AI in organizations faster than we can adopt new tool that's got AI behind them. I'll give you a really concrete example. So attackers are using AI in a couple of different ways. One is using vibe coding effectively, which is everybody doing on the internet, where they're writing exploits or looking for vulnerabilities in systems. And we've seen that play out in a couple of ways. One is the time period between when a vulnerability is known about in a platform and an exploit is available so someone can actually use that code to break into something. Somewhere around, we think it's about 10x faster between, I've got a vulnerability, now I've got some code where I could actually go and use it to break into someone, 10x faster. So what that means is the time as an organization you now have to fix that problem just got 10x shorter. Now, see earlier comment that patching is quite difficult. Patching in the current timescales where most people are trying to get critical patches out in 14 days or 10 days. I now just said that has to be 10 times faster. So that's going to be the real pain point for us as organization is how are we going to deal with that challenge of being able to patch faster? How are we going to deal with that problem? And that's the pain that's getting created for us.
And to pin some data on Christian's observation there, 2 years ago, the time taken from a known vulnerability to that vulnerability being exploited was about just over 30 days. Last year, that dropped to 5 days. And this year, more like 24 hours is much more common. And if you read both Anthropic and OpenAI publish a threat intelligence report, it makes fascinating reading. Anthropic talk about the weaponization of their own technology being used by threat actors. And they've introduced the term vibe hacking, which is how threat actors are using their technology to produce malicious code, automate aspects of their operations, and really advance the way that phishing activity, for example, is conducted, all the way through to supporting fraudulent employees at big tech companies. And so they can actually deliver real work product, but all AI enabled without the skills in the background. So that could be a nation state actor, for example, which is the example that Anthropic use, where nation state actors are getting access as employees to big tech companies, which obviously gives them access to funds and data.
And is AI actually changing the way that threats show up, or is it just making them faster and harder to pin down?
Bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, I think as Christian said, there are sort of three impacts really. I think one is the threat actors are using it to improve their own operations, ransomware as a service, etc., professionalizing what they can offer to the criminal market effectively. We're using it to defend ourselves. So if you can think about security logs, we might have billions of log entries using AI to process our own logs to detect anomalies. And then thirdly, it's also in itself an attack surface. So OpenAI recently launched an agent for browsers, and that introduces things like indirect prompt injection attack risks, where a browser gives an instruction to the LLM and it goes off and performs a malicious action like disclosing your data, for example. So really three ways in which AI is impacting cyber risk.
If you take that last point, one of the things that I would say in the next 3 to 5 years that we're most worried about in cyberspace is the whole agentic AI agenda. So we've actually got an AI operating on your behalf and as an agent, and it's got powers to do things, right? And if you imagine in a corporate space, as a hacker, I'm actually going to target that system now directly. It's all part of the new attack surface. And one of the challenges that we've always had, I mentioned identity, is we're not very good at locking down role-based access control. So that's very granular access about you as an individual having access to this system to do this very specific thing. If you imagine you've got 100 systems, you don't want to be very granular about every system. It's quite difficult to do. It's a large overhead. So when we deploy these agentic AIs, if we don't do that, if we're not very, very granular about the access it has and what it can do, you'll be able to manipulate them to do things that you didn't expect them to do because they'll be over-permissioned. So as an attacker, what I'll do is I'll talk to this agentic AI and I'll try and get it to do things that it shouldn't be able to do, whether it has access to systems, or it's a new attack surface, as well as it'll be able to do things that we don't expect it to do. So it's going to be a real challenge from that point of view.
I think this is obviously why there's a lot of nervousness in this space, both from a corporate perspective, but also on a personal level. Obviously, financial institutions and other highly regulated areas find this stuff challenging because we can't keep pace with some of what the threat actors are working with. So how do we challenge or work with that balance of needing to innovate, but also needing to protect?
I think there's a famous quote, virtue falls between two vices. I think it was Aristotle, maybe. And the two vices were recklessness and cowardice. And I think we've got a similar challenge to find the golden mean ourselves about how do we balance these things. But in reality, we need to think less of a balance between risk and reward, but actually how do we integrate security into every aspect of how we operate? And this is where you'll hear the concept of security by design, and how you embed security and security-related controls into the way that you build your systems. And as Christian mentioned earlier, looking at it from how you architect your technology is a first step. So rather than having to build security controls over every aspect of your organization, how do you build platforms in your architecture that standardize those security controls so that out of the gate, you've got security by design for the things that you're building? I think that's one part of the response.
That's a great quote, by the way. I'm going to use that. One of the challenges that I think we see coming with AI is this whole notion of kind of fear of missing out a little bit, right? Is if you see other organizations adopting it faster, how do I adopt it as an organization faster and faster with kind of worry about the risks later a little bit, right? And if you take vibe coding as a really interesting challenge, so I want to produce code or solutions faster and faster, so we adopt more vibe coding type techniques. That does a couple of things. One, we know it produces more code, and the volume, the code quality isn't as good, and potentially it could introduce vulnerabilities. But we love the idea that you can have citizen-led development where everybody could be a coder, and the idea that you can just create content and solutions faster and faster and faster. But then you have to build alongside that these rails that are going to keep us safe. Before the code can go in production, we need to scan it. We need some other AI maybe looking at it. And it's kind of that ecosystem of pipeline that we're going to have to build. So I think we have to adopt, otherwise we will be left behind. But at the same time, we have to adopt things alongside quickly. And I think lots of people are incubating ideas, trying it in certain areas where they trust people. And it's that balance that everybody's trying to aim for, right?
So we've talked a lot about how AI is a big part of the problem, but there's also quite a positive side to this that we could probably unpack a little bit more around how it can also be a big part of the solution. Can you share some thoughts on that, Adrian?
Okay, in general terms, AI can automate the detection of things like anomalous network traffic or the automation of detection of new forms of malware by their behavior rather than the footprint that they leave behind. And within Standard Chartered, the first line have built a fusion platform which seeks to use AI to correlate activity across financial crime, fraud, physical security, and cyber to give us the best intelligence we can about the behavior of those threat actors.
Christian, do you have anything that you would share from a more general perspective on the positive aspects of AI or what can it bring to the table?
Yeah, happy to. And I mean, I'm quite a glass half full kind of person when it comes to AI. I'm very positive about some of the aspects. And I give us a really interesting analogy I read about, it was yesterday actually, where if you look at how AI has been used historically, which is a funny thing to say, a new piece of technology, but if you take radiology, for example, and looking at x-rays and body scans and stuff like that, that's probably one of the most advanced area where AI has been used. If you imagine, before it used to take quite a number of days for someone to take pictures, for a radiographer to look at them. Now, that's completely changed, whereby it takes seconds to look at a scan to determine if someone has cancer or some sort of problem or something like that. And you can process images at a really, really rapid pace. And it really started me think about, like, well, we thought that we would lose all these radiologists, but what actually happened was we needed more radiologists, because instead of just scanning one person when we really had to because we were worried about something, we just started to scan everybody. And that's what's happened in the US most recently. And I was like, actually, that's a really positive story. If you spin that into cybersecurity, maybe there's things that we do in cyber that we've always wanted to do, but we haven't been able to do them because they're too expensive. They're too labor intensive. So, for example, when you build a new application, we would love to be able to do a really detailed risk assessment or a threat profile of how someone might attack that application. But to do that on every single application, maybe historically when you've got 5,000 apps, you just would never do that. 5 years and you would still be going. But you could use AI to do that. Or you could use AI to look at every single interaction that a user has to a platform to see if they're committing fraud in detail against every other user. You just wouldn't do that. So I'm kind of thinking of a very positive spin that we're just going to be able to do things that we've never been able to do at scale and at speed. So that's in threat prompting is one example of where that's going to go. And so one of the dreams of AI is the idea of automated control testing. The fact that instead of us doing sample testing of kind of, here's 100 transactions, I'll pick 20 of them and I'll look at them in detail. Why don't we just look at all 100 transactions in real time all the time using AI? And that's a slightly different way of looking at controls. So you don't have this event at the end of the year and go, oh, we had some anomalies, why didn't we pick them up? You just continuously do controls assessment. There's a completely different way of thinking about it. No one would ever in their right mind do that now because it would just be too expensive to do. But AI and automation will allow us to do those kind of things.
Oh, obviously, we're doing a lot in this space, Adrian, around supporting and making everything more secure, and thinking about the regulatory landscape and how we're being pushed, particularly in financial services, by regulators to do better. What does that look like in terms of evolution? How is that helping financial institutions, but also the broader corporate landscape in elevating in this space?
Yeah, I think in financial services we're lucky in that we have regulators working with us to improve the resilience of our services, because our services are critical for the real economy. And so when we think about the types of asks that regulators and regulation makes of us, they include asking ourselves questions such as, what are the severe but plausible scenarios that could impact our organization and impact our most important business services? And how would we mitigate the effects should those impacts come to pass? So we run scenario testing, we run simulations, we look at our control environment, and we look at our ability to recover, not if but when such an event would occur. And that, I think, scenario planning, looking at the failure modes of our controls, really helps us understand where things can go wrong and how to prepare in the event of the worst. And that extends to our regulators working with us to perform simulated cyber attacks. There are, whether it's ICAST or CBEST, depending on which regulator you're talking about, but these funny acronyms that describe exercises that are simulated adversarial attacks. And so that's working with parties, and we simulate attacks on the organization and make sure that we can respond to and protect ourselves against those kind of incidents.
And is the regulatory landscape changing? Are we seeing more in the space?
I think definitely going to see even more, I think, going forward. I think the focus from the regulator in the last couple of years has really shifted, obviously, to resilience. Mentioned that a number of times. That's definitely the core focus for the regulator. And I think that's also driven by this whole era of transparency. And you can see that in a couple of places, whether it's through the testing you talked about, whether it's regular reporting, it's regular visibility of what's happening in the ecosystem. And that's filtering down, right? The regulators are asking those questions. boards are asking those questions. How do I know I'm safe? How do you know you're safe? How are we reporting on cyber risk? How are you reporting it externally? That's very, very strong from a regulatory point of view.
And just to close us out, you've both mentioned resilience a number of times. So thinking about maintaining true resilience, what separates an organisation from having that, from just simply kind of ticking the boxes? And with that, what kind of key piece of advice would you like people to take away from today?
I think that the real challenge with true resilience is to understand how your business is built from the ground up. What boxes make up what services services depend on other services, what business processes sit on top of that, what third parties. It's a really, really complex jigsaw. I think you can get lost in that complexity of an organization. So, focusing on the basics around, whether it's patching, whether it's responding to an incident, whether having immutable backups, understanding that how you're managing your attack surface, and just being ready is a long way to getting to resilience while you deal with that mesh of complexity. I think you could try and map everything out in a document, how your organization, but it doesn't actually make you any more resilient. And while you're doing that, you need to focus on some of the fundamentals. When you actually look at how people get attacked or they get hacked, it's not some sort of really, really complex thing that's occurred. It's normally a series of chains of quite simple things. Someone didn't follow a process, let someone reset a password, or two-factor authentication wasn't on the system, or the system wasn't patched, or we knew about it was legacy. That's actually where I would say 80%, or even more, of people actually get into trouble. It's with the basics, not with really complex things you see in Hollywood blockbusters. And I think that's what we lose direction sometimes.
So is that the advice you'd give? Focus on the basics, get them right.
Yeah.
Work from there.
Work from there, yeah.
Okay. Adrian, what about you?
Christian and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about what's happened in Japan this year, where there's been a massive explosion in cyber-related fraud, so investment fraud and banking-related fraud. And that is down to age-old tactics, phishing, and exploiting the weaknesses inherent in individuals. And so I would say people and culture for me.
That's a fascinating one, because that's got an AI element to it as well, that historically when phishing emails were written in different languages, they weren't very good. And I couldn't write a phishing email in Japanese, but with an LLM, I can now. And there's this massive explosion in kind of writing very good phishing emails in different languages, where people might not have been used to seeing it before. So, yeah.
Convincingly as well. I think
it all comes back to AI.
Yeah. All roads lead back to AI.
Yes.
On that note, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.